Hello there. So today I've been keeping this inside of my heart for a long time. It's bothering me and I've been hearing both sides of the argument about why our kids can't read today. And there's one thing that I have noticed when I was teaching in the school system is that kids don't have enough reading time. But kids reading is only a piece of it, right? There's all these different pieces of reading. And my goal is to constantly be able to put kids in books that help with the specific skill they're working on. Some people would call this a phonics based approach, but the difference is we're not just working on phonics. We're also working on their fluency. We're working on their comprehension and understanding deeper level texts and being able to answer questions so that when they do take those state tests, they can be successful on them. And what I've noticed is that when we just go with a phonics approach for all kids, is that the kids are slowed down in their reading progress. This is our problem with having a one size fits all curriculum for our students, regardless if you go with a whole language approach, a balanced literacy approach, or a phonics approach. One size does not fit all, no matter what. We're going to hear some things inside of with Dr. Phil and his guest that he has on in here. And what I'd like to do is share my thoughts with each piece of what they're saying, comment along the way.
You haven't heard, America's education system is in a state of crisis. We're talking about a country that's supposed to be a leader in innovation and progress. But when it comes to education, we are lagging way behind. The latest figures show that around 40% of our fourth graders can't read at
Wait, 40% of the fourth graders can't read?
a basic level, the highest percentage since 2002.
Wow, that definitely sounds like a problem, doesn't it? That means only 60% are reading at or above grade level. That is a serious problem.
That's right, just under half of our fourth graders aren't proficient in reading. We're spending more money on education than most countries, but we're still falling short.
They rank the top 40 countries in the world. We're ranked number 40th. That means something's really wrong.
And we're ranked for everybody across the world. We can't even blame it on the pandemic because everybody experienced the pandemic. So why are we 40th?
Much of the country is facing a child literacy crisis. Just 1 in 3 fourth graders was at or above proficiency in reading last year, with nearly 4 in 10 performing below basic level. The balanced literacy theory, an approach used in some classrooms nationwide for over 2 decades. Rather than learning to sound out letter combinations,
Yeah, they were sounding out letter combinations.
also called phonics, teachers focused on what's known as cueing, instructing children to use context and other clues to figure out words.
So that is part of it. Like balanced literacy is not cueing, and phonics is not just sounding out words because there are words and like this it drives me crazy how people misrepresent the information because if I ask a child what would you expect to hear at the beginning of this word, I'm getting their brain to think about this, right? They've just said a word, they guessed a word. Now kids guess no matter what, whether they have a phonics approach or whether they have a balanced literacy approach or a whole language, they utilize guessing to be able to figure out the word. That is a strategy that they use. Now, I try to help my students by saying, look, here are all of the strategies. One of the strategies is guessing, one of the strategies is being able to sound it out. Another strategy is to be able to use spot and dot. Which strategy would you like to be able to use to figure out this word? And so if they try guessing, that's fine. We can then take a look and see, does guessing work for you? Were you right? Does that make sense? Those types of cues get the kid like thinking in their brain. Now, could people use this too much and focus too much on cueing, which it like all of balanced literacy is not just about this one strategy. Absolutely. There are people that are just they're not totally going to understand it and they're going to go too far into it. Just like people who are going to say that I should sound out a word from left to right without actually knowing how to segment word parts and syllables to be able to read a word accurately. So it's just mind-boggling to me that we're saying, "Look, let's not use any of the metacognition reading skills because this cueing system, it just doesn't work." I'm gonna tell you, engaging kids' brain and thinking about the word that they're looking at versus their brain going into it goes into this passive mode where they're thinking about what they're reading, but they're not actually looking at the word. That passive mode is what is causing some of the problems, and we need to get the kids engaged in an active reading mode.
They weren't reading the words, they were guessing.
Yeah. And again, like I mentioned before, guessing happens with kids who do phonics based instruction because that's what they do. Like, they love it. Have them watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The kids are going to guess at an answer. And if they get it right, they're super excited. We can't get rid of guessing as a part of a strategy, but we can use the information that's presented in front of us to make better decisions. And we can use sounding it out as part of that. We can use, does that sound right? Think about what you heard as you say that, or finish it. Take a look at the ending here, right? We want kids to be able to look at words and word parts and make sure that they look right versus guessing. Guessing will happen no matter what program you are teaching kids. It is not just in balanced literacy.
We realized very quickly that students weren't acquiring the skills to actually sound out words, decode words, spell words. They weren't actually learning to read.
And let's not forget the impact of the pandemic. We shut down schools for over a year, 2 years in many cases, creating gaps in education that we're still trying to close. It's no wonder our children are demotivated and getting left behind.
Now, interestingly, he doesn't talk about the teacher shortage here, right? And so we're also hiring teachers that don't have a strong education in teaching reading. And he doesn't mention that inside of our education system in at the college level, when teachers are going through teacher prep, he doesn't mention that there's only a couple of courses in teaching reading. And that is supposed to be enough to be able to prep our teachers for the students that they're supposed to teach. And we have dumb classes that I had to take, at least when I went through my college, I had to take an art class. Was that the best use of my time? I don't think so. You know what my big final that I had to do for the class was? I had to submit a portfolio of all of my art projects I had done for that semester. Now, I'm very hands-on and crafty. I got an A in the class, easy A, I might say, but I don't think that prepared me in the best way for the students that I was going to be working with when I got into the school system.
Look, I'm not one to sugarcoat things, so here's the raw truth. Our schools are like trying to fit every child into the same pair of shoes. One size does not fit all.
Thank you. Yes, that is exactly it. One size does not fit all. Thank you, Dr. Phil. It does not. And so we need to stop putting kids in the same exact reading program. We need to find out if kids do have dyslexia early on because we now have the resources and the tools to be able to figure it out. And so we need to use that information to find out which is going to be the best learning style of reading for each of the students that we encounter. There are some kids that are going to be able to learn it faster and they don't need to go through the process because their brain automatically already sees patterns. And then we got kiddos where they can't see those patterns. And so we have to help them in being able to sound out those words and be able to notice those patterns so they can sound them out appropriately.
We're teaching to the middle, leaving the gifted children bored out of their minds.
Amen. They're bored out of their minds. So true. And then that's causing behavior problems, which then doesn't allow us to be able to teach the other kids in the classroom.
And the struggling ones just behind in the dust.
I disagree. I think that they are doing interventions in the school system, but what I've noticed is sometimes the interventions that they're doing practically mirror the type of instruction that they're giving in the larger classroom, but into a smaller classroom setting. So that's a problem. But I am seeing some great programs that are being put on out there that are really focusing on some of the skills, but then we're not identifying is that the skill that the student specifically needs to focus on. So I have a student that is in 5th grade. They told her that she needs to go into a comprehension class, but she cannot read text. She couldn't read text at a 1st grade level, like literally couldn't read it. If I can't read it, that's not a comprehension problem. That's a phonics problem, right? And I need to address that, not put her into a comprehension intervention, right? I need to get her reading those words and those sounds, and I need to be able to use all of the things that we know. But at the same time, I don't need to put every student through an Orton Gillingham approach, which is a very slow process for teaching reading.
And don't even get me started on what these children are learning, or should I say not learning. We've got graduates walking out of high school who cannot read.
That absolutely should not be allowed. I'm sorry. If you can't read, you shouldn't be able to graduate. We have to have some kind of boundaries, right? It's not, oh, you got to 12th grade, let's graduate everybody. That's ridiculous.
I've been sounding an alarm on this issue for a long time, apparently not loud enough. I was in public schools, and they geared the curriculum to the least.
I actually disagree with what you said around the idea now of teaching to the least. We actually have to teach the middle.
I'm going to disagree right back, because when I went to school, of course, we were chipping things in stone tablets then. They were gearing to the least. Now they're trying to hit the middle.
Yes. It's indicative of our school system that we don't see kids as whole humans, and that's how the system is set up.
You think public school doesn't listen to children?
Correct.
Or teachers. It is not just children. It's teachers. Teachers who have spent years going through education and learning what are the best practices in teaching reading and not listening to them. Or teachers who they only believe that there's one way to teach something. And so then they go off the tangent on this is what everybody should be doing versus understanding that whole child and what is it that they need.
I've been talking to my panel of experts and parents today about their thoughts on how public school curriculum should be handled.
Every student should feel as though they and their family are protected and respected in that classroom.
I absolutely agree, but I'm going to also bring up another problem, and that's the problem of misinformation.
There's a policy at schools. It's called the parental secrecy policy. And by having that policy, our children are very unprotected.
After the parents, the next best adult a student should go to for advice, for help, is the teacher or the guidance counselor.
For 26 years, I've been heralding teachers, but they know what they know, and I'm aware of only a few teaching curriculums in preparing these teachers to be uniquely qualified to handle this sort of challenge.
You're right. Misinformation, giving the wrong information is worse than giving no information at all. And teachers not being trained is a bigger issue.
You say K through 12 has just collapsed.
Correct.
What do you mean by that?
These students don't even know the very basics of American government. It's across the board. It's in every subject.
Clearly, our education system is not working the way it should. We need real solutions, not just Band-Aids. So tonight, we're going to dive into the heart of this crisis and explore what's really going on in our schools and specifically why our students can't read. Sarah is a former teacher who had a revelation that will leave you speechless. After dedicating nearly 2 decades to teaching 3rd grade, she discovered a shocking truth. The method she had been using for years was not helping her students become proficient readers. But here's the kicker. Her own children started struggling with reading. Sarah's joining us tonight. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. This is really intriguing to me. Tell me about when you first noticed your oldest son had issues with reading.
Sure. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Like you said, I was trained in balanced literacy methods. I went to the University of Michigan, graduated at the top of my class, found a job out in Massachusetts, and started teaching 3rd grade. All was well. I even took a step further. I got a master's degree in literacy and reading. And so I felt really
well prepared to teach reading. Ended up getting a grant for this was during the No Child Left Behind times. And we got a grant called the Reading First Grant. It wasn't until I went through all of the trainings from the Reading Grant that I really understood how to teach reading. And so even getting a master's in reading doesn't make you necessarily, equipped for the types of students that you're going to deal with. But that grant had the best instruction, and it shared what programs work for what specific skills, and in using like those different programs, and it even created like certain programs for us to be able to utilize that were available for free through the Florida Center of Reading Research. It was an incredible thing. So I think this problem starts in our education system, that we are paying, like us teachers, we are paying as much money as a engineer, and I know this because my husband and I went to the same university. I paid just as much as he did to go to Marquette University, right? So I'm putting good money down, and then the information that I am leaving with is not leaving me prepared. And when I went to get my master's, the university that I went to no longer exists, Cardinal Stritch University. I would say we spent so much time digging into these philosophies instead of really looking at the skills that I would need in order to be able to teach these kids how to close the reading gap.
So when my oldest, Nolan, was in school, he was put in a small reading group. I think in about first grade, we got a letter sent home that said Nolan could use a little extra help. We're going to see him 3 to 4 times a week for 30 minutes.
Oh my God, I love that picture. Was he so sweet? Gosh, that was the sweetest thing ever. Look at this. I'm going to come back to that. See if I can get it back to that little picture there. That was so sweet. There he is. Look at that. I love it. First grade, struggling with reading, and the school is doing something. They put him into a small group reading instruction group, right? And now let's see what happens.
Do I agree? And of course I agreed. I really want.
What we don't know is who was teaching that group. Because in the school that I worked for, if you had like a teaching license, you could be hired as a tutor that would come on into the school to be able to do that. You really didn't need a lot of education in order to do this. And there's a lot of schools right now that are employing these free, like these services with people that are volunteers and training volunteers.
Really wanted what was best for my child, my son, and I said, this sounds like a great idea. Interestingly enough, it really mirrored the type of instruction that I was doing.
So if you take the kids and you give them more of what they're already experiencing inside of the classroom, you're going to have problems. Now, I would have teachers, like for a long time, the parents would always ask me like, hey, can you go on in and can you have a conversation with a classroom teacher? And the classroom teacher would want me to mirror what they're doing in the classroom. Now, there are certain things that we should be mirroring: the type of language we're using with students, and we should be not confusing them. And I, as a literacy expert, already know that, right? That's not my goal. So I always ask my students, hey, have you ever heard of this before? Or have you heard of it this way? Because I know all of the different ways that kids talk about it. Or they introduce me to the new way that they've been talking about it. So now it's not just silent E or bossy E. There's another way that some curriculums talk about it as sneaky E. All right. So I will use the language that the student already knows when I'm teaching them. But a lot of classroom instruction teachers, they don't want a tutor helping their child outside of their school system because they're going to use different language. But they don't realize that's already happening inside of the current school system that you already have, which is causing confusion. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is mirroring the instruction that you're already doing in the classroom, but just really making it a smaller size now. That is not going to help kids with their reading.
Taught in the same district that Nolan was going to school in. So I felt really confident that he was going to be in good hands and he was going to learn how to read. So time went on, a year, 2 years, he's still in this small reading group. And around third grade, which was the grade I taught, I felt like something was just missing for him. He just wasn't confident. He wasn't really interested in reading outside of school. And that's when I really pushed to have him evaluated for an individual education plan.
And so most parents don't even know that they can do this, right? And why did this happen? This happened because there's a possibility that he did have dyslexia. Who knows? But the assessments that they could have gotten to be able to identify that cost $5,000 if a parent seeks that out. And the school system will only identify if a student has a specific learning disability in reading and doesn't test for dyslexia in many cases. And a lot of schools still don't acknowledge that dyslexia even exists. That is a problem. If we know that 20% of our kids actually do struggle with neurodiverse learning strategies and all of these kinds of things, we keep changing the language because negativity spawns from the words that we've been using, and then we have to change the language. It just becomes this big cycle. I think that California has it right when they are actually doing the assessments to find out, could dyslexia be causing the problem in kindergarten? There are things that we can do to figure that out, and then we can give the appropriate education to those kids right away out of the gate.
Listen, I want to make a big deal out of what you just said because sadly, most parents wouldn't do what you did. The truth is, most parents don't know to ask for that evaluation. They're not that informed, vigilant, diligent. Doesn't mean they don't love their children, but they're not inside baseball like you are. You knew what to ask for, you knew what to do. And this will help parents know they can do that. What did you learn when you asked for that evaluation?
It's interesting. At that point, I actually really didn't know. I had the mother's intuition, and I do tell parents to trust your gut. You just know when something isn't right. And at that point, I really was still teaching using balanced literacy. I was cueing kids to, does it look right? Does it sound right? And does it make sense? Those were things I was asking my first graders, my second graders, I was teaching in small groups to do, rather than really sound out the words. Of course, there was some phonics. It's not like balanced literacy has no phonics instruction, but I still wasn't really clear on what was missing with Nolan, but I think it was my gut. So I had him tested, and it turns out when I looked at his assessments in a lot of the basic reading skills, he was below average. So I knew enough then that he needed some specialized support, but I think I didn't really realize that he really wasn't learning disabled. He just had a lack of appropriate instruction that really helped build that reading circuit in the brain.
Yeah, and most likely because he was passively reading and not really thinking as he was reading. He wasn't looking at the sounds of the letters or whatever the case may be. There's nothing wrong with modeling reading. There's nothing wrong with release of responsibility. There's a lot of strategies that are in balanced literacy are good strategies. I think it's really funny that we pull out the queuing system as the one strategy. Oh, it's the queuing system that was the problem. Maybe. Again, it's probably overuse of the queuing system, right? You have to tell the kids what to do, right? If they don't understand the terminology, then yeah, they're going to struggle with it. They're not going to know what you're talking about. So I always tell my students, take a look at the first letter because they, a lot of times, if they don't say the sound of the first letter, let's start there. Let's start at the beginning, right? Tell them specifically what to do versus leave them guessing as to what they should do.
It's when my daughter, his younger sister, was working with me during COVID. So Nolan was older by then. I was still using these methods of balanced literacy. And it was first grade, her school shut down. And I said, what better opportunity? I am a teacher. I have a master's degree. I have a willing student. And I sat her down. We had our little guided reading books. After 3 weeks, daily instruction, a lot of instruction, she had really not progressed at all. She had just memorized the books. I think
the memorizing piece isn't a problem because you're getting practice with those sight words that you're going to see over and over again. They get more confident. So some people say, oh, they're memorizing. You don't just throw on in. So I found before a level D, the kids need certain phonics skills in order to be able to read effectively. And if they don't have those phonics skills, they're going to struggle. So before that level, before they get to D, I'll throw in one of those phonics. It's not my main tool that I utilize as I'm teaching students because I'm going to use books that are going to support them right where they're at. We're going to be taking a look at sight word books so that they can see those sight words and they can use images and clues to finish it off, but they're getting the practice. They're seeing those words. They're able to identify them. They're able to read them because look, if you can't read the word the, we're going to have a very big problem, right? And we can't sound it out. And it's in every single book. So there's a certain level of books that we have to teach in a certain order. And I think this is really important to do.
Coupled with my daughter made me realize, well, I think it's the teaching method. I think there's something that I'm doing wrong. And that was really difficult to think back to all the students I'd worked with to chalk up to saying, obviously, it's their fault or their parents aren't reading to them. I feel
No, I've been able to work with students who they don't have any support at home and get them on reading level very quickly. It definitely there were some reading instruction things that were being pushed inside of that school system she was working for that were causing some of the problems that they were experiencing. So this comes down to having a good reading specialist in the school system who's able to take a look and see what's working, what's not working, and be able to eyeball all of that.
feel terrible of the things that I thought. And I came to that revelation after watching my daughter really go through structured literacy at Orton Gillingham to really make that progress.
Okay, boy, you and I need to talk about a lot of stuff. Man, oh man, we've got to take a break. Coming up, Sarah says her son struggled with reading from the start, but the school solution wasn't enough, and we're going to add him to this conversation when we come back. Let's cut to the chase. Your savings could be in serious.
All right, we're going to skip this part here. We don't need to learn about the savings piece.
For dyslexic learners, what's the alternative? Structured literacy, which is a term coined by the International Dyslexia Association. A really key element is the use of decodable, not predictable texts.
I think there's a place for both of those types of texts because the kids' brains get extremely tired having to sound out every single word. And some of those decodable books are long and they're not interesting. They're very boring for the kids, and so it doesn't capture their attention. And so having a mix of the right books at the right time is essential for kids to enjoy the reading process. Kids don't get to pick what decodable book they would like to read, right? And so the kids are just left in, oh, it's just this reading is just this boring thing that I have to do that's going to have these names that are I have to sound on out and all these words I have to sound on out, but the stories aren't very interesting. They're not set up like real stories. I'm not learning about the way that books are structured and understanding them, which then also aids in my comprehension. And very little is spent on asking comprehension questions about what that decodable book was about. I have added the UFly system inside of the teaching that I do so that I do have the structured phonics approach inside of there, but not once does it have any comprehension question. So I really do want kids realizing that when they're reading, we want to be able to make sure that we're actually understanding what we're reading because it's not just about sounding out the words, it's thinking. And when we go to just a phonics approach, there's going to be a percentage now that are just going to, they're going to struggle with that comprehension piece even more.
Less emphasis is placed on discovery, so we give kids quick feedback about their errors. And some of them who weren't going to learn at all with balanced literacy, now they can.
Sometimes it's not about giving feedback about their errors, it's about letting them try again. I find that when we can be less interruptive in their reading and we can do certain things like just say, hey, try again, versus telling them what the word is or telling them to sound it out, they can figure it out a lot of times. I would say 80% of the times my kids actually figure it out without any kind of instruction on my part. It was just trying it again.
That was one teacher's opinion about how the balanced theory of reading has been failing students, especially those who struggle with reading. Now, Sarah spent nearly 20 years teaching children to read until she realized the methods that she was using were just not working.
And that is not her fault. She had invested in her education. The education system failed her. It failed me. And it wasn't until I got that Reading First grant that I was able to really understand all of the intricacies of what is involved with reading, how to identify what a child is specifically struggling with, and what activities do I need to put into place so that child can be successful in just right text. So some of that text might be predictable text. Some of that text might be decodable text. Some of that text might be sight word books. it's putting them in the text that's gonna allow themselves to see themselves as a reader, but then they're gonna need to have choice as well. If they're only reading decodable books, when do you put them on into chapter books? Like, how do you make the switch? At some point, it needs to happen, and they're not gonna be able to sound out every single word that is inside of a chapter book. And so you're delaying how quickly a kid could get into chapter books by only focusing on phonics for a majority of the students. So it's really important to yes, have a right mix of what is needed for the classroom. And having a one size fits all curriculum doesn't do it. I could go on and on about this topic, but I just thought it was very interesting that I saw this on Dr. Phil and really wanted to share my thoughts about this. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. We hear the science of reading, but what I'm noticing is the science of reading is really leaving out a big portion of reading, which is comprehension and getting kids there. So now I'm seeing more kids who are getting the phonics instruction, fantastic, but they're not understanding. So are you really reading at a second grade level if you can't answer any of the questions, but you can read all of the words? And to me, that's what like a true balanced literacy is. I'm not sure what they were taught in balanced literacy because I didn't go through that process of doing that. But in my mind, what balanced literacy means is being able to understand all the components of reading. You need to understand phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, motivation. We need to understand all of those components so that we can put together the right programs for those kids that are struggling versus rely solely on just a curriculum. And that's what I love about what I get to do on a daily basis as a reading tutor. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think? You may disagree with me, and that is okay. I am not going to take it personally. Just be respectful in your comments. We don't need to use words about ignorance or those kinds of things. I love that I get to today work with the kids one-on-one to just solely focus on those skills that they specifically need. I can skip those skills that they already have, and we can make further progress faster. And this is what I would love to introduce into the school system so that these kids can get in and out of their interventions and back into their classroom and having success. Now, if you're looking with how do I actually tutor kids how to read online so they can close that gap as quick as they possibly can, message me because I have created an entire program called the Reading Interventionist that goes through what are all the best practices that we need to be putting into place and how can we go through that process. I've utilized that information from that Reading First grant that I have put into my backpack of resources and tools, and I want to be able to share those kinds of things with you so that you can have the best results for your students and you just don't rely on just the same curriculum for every child. Because if one size does not fit all in the school system, one size fits all certainly does not fit in the tutoring situation. If we want to be able to get better results, we need to use something different and we need to understand all the areas of literacy so that we can pick out those ones that this particular child needs to focus on. So if that's something you're interested in, message me.